Ryan's Office Revenge. CEO Daniel Crawford slammed my office door open so hard the glass rattled in the frame. "You need to pack up now. No hello, no warning, just pure authority bulldozing into my space like he owned every inch of it." Which, technically, he did. I'm Michael Thompson, 49 years old, and that office had been my command center for 18 years. As Chief Operations Officer, I was the guy who made sure this place actually worked when the fancy PowerPoint strategies crashed into reality. You know how it is in corporate America. Executives love making big plans, but someone's got to figure out how to actually pull them off without everything falling apart. When systems broke, I fixed them. When Daniel's aggressive expansion plans threatened to collapse under their own weight, I built the backbone to hold it all up. The guy knew it too. He also hated every minute of depending on someone he couldn't completely control. Daniel stood there in his $3,000 suit, jaw clenched, eyes already looking past me, like I was yesterday's problem. Kevin Murphy from HR lurked behind him, clutching a folder like it might protect him from whatever was about to go down. I didn't get up. Shock nailed me to my chair, but something else kicked in too. That tactical awareness you pick up after 6 years in the Army before jumping into the corporate world. Always assess the situation before you react. "We're making leadership changes," Daniel said, crisp as his starched collar. "Your role is no longer required." I asked him to say it again, not because I didn't hear him, but because I needed to hear how casually he'd wipe out 18 years of my life. He let out this irritated sigh, like I was wasting his precious time. "You're replaceable, Michael. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." That word hit me harder than the actual firing. Replaceable. Like all those late nights rebuilding their supply chain when vendors bailed. Like all the crisis management when his expansion plans outran reality, like saving his neck when the West Coast rollout nearly tanked because he ignored every capacity warning I gave him. None of it mattered, apparently. I felt my temper flare but pushed it down. Military training beats that into you. Reacting in the moment usually makes everything worse. "What about my equity?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Daniel didn't even blink. Those were always conditional. They never vested. Just like that, 18 years of promises turned into corporate doublespeak. I reminded him, real calm, that this company survived 2 major restructurings and 1 near bankruptcy because I rebuilt everything from scratch each time. Daniel gave me that thin smile he used on people who forgot their place. "You supported the vision," he said. "You didn't own it." And there it was, the real kick in the teeth. Not just the firing, but rewriting history to make it sound like I was some mid-level clerk instead of the guy who kept the lights on. I nodded once, grabbed my notebook, and stood up. Daniel stepped aside immediately, already mentally moving on to his next meeting. What he didn't notice was my attorney sitting quietly in the corner. Old habit from my Army days. Always have backup you don't advertise. As I walked past Daniel, my lawyer closed his folder and looked up at Kevin. "Before you leave," he said, "calm as you please. I'll need copies of Mr. Thompson's original shareholder agreements. You know that feeling when something shifts and you can't quite put your finger on what just happened?" That was the moment. By the time I got to my car, my email was dead. 18 years of access. Gone. Just like that. Some IT guy probably got a text and hit delete. Later that day, a colleague texted asking why my name disappeared from the operational framework I'd written 3 months earlier. I didn't bother answering. The message was crystal clear. Erase first, explain later. I was pissed that night, but I kept it to myself. Sat at my kitchen table thinking about all the messes I'd cleaned up to make Daniel look good. When his West Coast expansion nearly imploded because he ignored capacity constraints, I worked 80-hour weeks restructuring our entire distribution network. When client retention tanked because he overpromised delivery times, I rebuilt our fulfillment process from the ground up. Every fix made him look like a genius. Every success became his story. My wife Jennifer found me still sitting there at midnight. "You okay?" she asked, putting her hand on my shoulder. "Just thinking," I said. After 22 years of marriage, she knows when I need to work through something on my own. Next morning, Kevin finally called. His tone was all rehearsed sympathy, the kind they probably teach in HR school. I asked the question everyone pretends not to understand. "What about my equity?" Pause. Then this sentence delivered like company policy, not actual truth. "No equity is owed, Michael." They said it again, slower, like I was too stupid to get it the first time. I ended the call politely, hands steady enough to notice. 18 years reduced to a checkbox on someone's termination list. Here's where most people would start making noise. Hire a lawyer, file a lawsuit, call the local news. Daniel was probably counting on that reaction. It would let him play the victim, the decisive leader protecting the company from a bitter ex-employee. I'd watched him thrive on that kind of drama for years. Every conflict became his chance to look tough and decisive, while the other guy burned out trying to match his energy. So I chose something different. I chose to sit still and let the weight settle. Fighting right then would only prove his point about me being a problem. Instead, I made space for something else to develop. My attorney called an hour later. His voice was steady, analytical, the way lawyers sound when they've found something interesting. Vesting, he explained, had been deferred, not revoked. The distinction matters more than they realize. That got my attention. Ownership had been stalled, sure, but something else hadn't vanished with it. When I hung up, that anger stopped eating me up from the inside. It didn't disappear. It just got organized. I stayed at that kitchen table that evening, reading documents I'd once trusted, feeling my frustration sharpen into something more useful. Daniel thought time erased leverage. Big mistake. The systems I'd built had taught me patience, how to think 3 moves ahead. I didn't need to make noise. I needed to be accurate. Somewhere between being pissed off and getting focused, I saw a path Daniel never imagined I could still walk. It would take the kind of disciplined patience the army had beaten into me, but patience with a purpose this time. The next night, I felt calmer. Not because I'd accepted anything, not because I'd forgiven anybody, just steady and quiet enough to read without my hands shaking. I spread those agreements across my kitchen table, the same documents Daniel had brushed off as standard legal boilerplate. This time I didn't skim. I read them the way I'd always approached broken systems, line by line, assumption by assumption, looking for what everyone else had missed. That's when I found it. My economic rights, the money part everyone obsessed over, were tied to deferred vesting. Ownership, value, payout, all paused, all up for debate. But voting rights? They lived in a completely different section. They weren't conditional. They weren't revoked. Hell, they weren't even mentioned in the termination paperwork. Economic interest and authority had been treated as the same thing for so long that nobody noticed they weren't. I read that paragraph 3 times, slower each time. There it was, clear as day and unambiguous as a stop sign. The company hadn't taken my voice. They'd just assumed I wouldn't realize it was still mine. Now, the obvious play would have been to lawyer up and sue their asses. Everyone expects noise from a fired executive. Lawsuits create headlines, drama, people picking sides. Daniel would have loved that fight. Conflict let him pose as the decisive leader defending the company from a bitter ex-employee. I'd spent 18 years watching him feed off that kind of drama, while other people burned out trying to match his energy. I wasn't about to give him another stage to perform on. So I picked silence. No lawsuits, no threats, no public demands. If they'd really stripped me of authority, I would have fought. But they hadn't. If I still had a voice, they had nothing to fear from me using it properly. That logic settled into my thinking like tactical doctrine from the old days. With calm came clarity. I stopped obsessing about what I'd lost and started mapping what still connected to me. Governance, process, timing. The same principles I'd used to stabilize failing divisions now applied to my own situation. My phone rang while I was making notes in the margins. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then the caller said my name carefully, like he was testing how much weight it still carried. Timothy Walsh, he introduced himself. No small talk, just straight to it. CEO of Pinnacle Industries, our biggest competitor. He said he'd been watching what happened inside Daniel's company with what he called professional interest. I hear you're being quieter than expected, he said. I told him I preferred accuracy to noise. He laughed once, short and controlled. He wasn't calling to offer sympathy or a job. He was calling because he understood leverage when he saw it. As we talked, something hardened in me. Not anger, not bitterness, but precision. Daniel thought control came from stripping people down. Timothy understood it came from knowing exactly what remained in play. I ended the call without agreeing to anything, but the path had gotten sharper. Calm had turned into awareness. Awareness into intent. Whatever came next would be deliberate, measured, and impossible to brush off. You ever been in one of those situations where everything suddenly clicks? Where all the pieces you didn't even know you were collecting suddenly form a picture? That's what happened over the next couple days. I met Timothy 2 days later in a conference room that didn't belong to either of us. Neutral ground matters when you're negotiating leverage. Smart operators understand that. Timothy didn't waste time with sympathy or small talk. He asked one question. What do you still control? I answered straight up. I didn't own shares anymore, didn't run operations, couldn't even check my old email. But I could delegate voting authority temporarily, and only because the contracts allowed it. Proxy voting. Clean, legal, precise. Ownership stayed exactly where it was. My name stayed on the cap table. My voice, though? That could be assigned to someone who knew how to use it effectively. Timothy leaned back in his chair, sizing me up. I don't want your company, he said. I want transparency. That worked for me. I slid the draft agreement across the table. It was short on drama and heavy on limits. No acquisition attempts, no board manipulation beyond a single vote, one purpose only, trigger independent governance review and external audit. The ethics clause made him pause. It always does. I watched him read it twice. You're tying my hands, he said. I'm protecting mine, I replied. Cold, factual, done with the conversation. The structure was simple. He'd hold my voting power for a specific window. He could use it once, in one meeting, to force questions Daniel had been avoiding for years. After that, authority came back to me automatically. No extensions, no improvisation, no changing the rules mid-game. Timothy asked about money. I named a number that reflected risk, not revenge. He nodded without trying to negotiate. Experienced operators recognize clean leverage when they see it. The tension peaked when he got to the final page. That's where I'd put the reversion clause. Upon completion of stated objectives, all voting rights revert to Michael Thompson for nominal consideration. $1, I said. A symbol and a reminder. He signed without ceremony. No speeches, no threats, just ink on paper. Real power shifts happen quietly, which is exactly how I preferred it. When I left that building, I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. The board meeting was called with less than 24 hours' notice. Classic Daniel playbook when he wanted to control the agenda. I joined remotely, camera off, listening to directors exchange polite greetings that sounded like they were reading from a script. Daniel ran those rooms by pure habit. Everyone knew it, accepted it, lived with it. That was about to change. When Timothy introduced himself, you could have heard a pin drop. "I'm here as proxy holder for Michael Thompson," he said, calm as ordering coffee. Dead silence on the line. I could actually hear chairs creaking as people shifted around, papers stopping mid-shuffle. Daniel broke first, which didn't surprise me. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "He has no authority to do this." His voice got louder as he looked around the virtual room for support that wasn't coming. Timothy didn't argue. Smart move. He just referenced the agreement and asked for his voting rights to be recognized. You could feel the surprise ripple through the board. Some members looked confused on their video feeds. Others looked uncomfortable, which was way worse for Daniel. He started accusing me of sabotage, of betraying the company out of pure spite. I watched him unravel from my kitchen table, feeling completely detached. Anger always made him sloppy, and this was no exception. Timothy waited until Daniel finished his rant. "I'm exercising one vote," he said, "to initiate independent audit and governance review. Clean and simple. No big speech, no justification, just procedure." The vote happened fast, almost mechanical, and it passed. Then came the moment nobody saw coming. Rachel Martinez, the senior board member, cleared her throat. When Rachel spoke, people listened. She was all business, no nonsense. "The motion is valid," she said, "and the audit is mandatory under company policy." Daniel turned toward her on screen, looking stunned. Like loyalty should somehow override actual rules. Then Rachel dropped the bomb. Due to the scope of this audit, Daniel's voting authority will be temporarily suspended to avoid conflicts of interest. The room went dead quiet. Directors stared at their screens like they couldn't believe what they'd just heard. Daniel laughed once, sharp, hollow, before realizing nobody else found it funny. When the meeting ended, nothing felt settled, but everything felt unstable. Daniel had lost his voice in the room he'd controlled for 6 years, and nobody knew what that meant yet, including him. I closed my laptop slowly, hand steady, heart hammering under the surface. This was the first crack in the dam, not the whole thing breaking open. Daniel didn't wait long to hit back. His first call came that night, voice tight, controlled, sharpened by panic he was trying to hide. He accused me of sabotage, of working with competitors, of trying to destroy the company I'd helped build. By morning, the whisper campaign started. Anonymous tips reached staff members. My name started appearing next to words like disloyal and dangerous. Daniel needed a villain for his story, and he picked me. I said nothing. Every response would have fed his narrative about the bitter ex-employee causing trouble. The threats escalated quickly after that. His messages turned personal, hinting at lawsuits, industry blacklists, consequences he thought still belonged to him. "You're finished if you don't undo this," he said in one voicemail. I could hear his breathing getting uneven. I saved the message and didn't call back. Fear had replaced authority in his voice, and that told me everything I needed to know about where this was heading. 3 days later, the official notice arrived. Daniel filed a lawsuit for breach of loyalty, claiming my proxy agreement violated fiduciary duty. The filing was aggressive, public, and rushed. He wanted speed, not accuracy. He wanted pressure to force me to back down. Instead, it triggered a deeper review. We had an emergency session with the board the next week. Daniel came out swinging, all rehearsed indignation, painting himself as the protector and me as the traitor. I listened with my hands folded, breathing steady. When he finished his performance, Rachel Martinez asked for a pause. Her voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. She'd found something Daniel hadn't expected anyone to actually read, a clause buried deep in the original retention agreement from 18 years ago. It authorized proxy delegation under specific governance circumstances. Here's the kicker. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was Daniel's, dated 18 years earlier when he was CFO and had drafted the policy himself. Watching his face. When Rachel explained this was better than any revenge I could have planned. The room shifted. Daniel's expression drained as she walked through the implications step by step. His own authorization had enabled the exact action he was now trying to sue me for. The irony was so perfect, it felt scripted. For the first time since this whole thing started, Daniel had nothing to say. The lawsuit couldn't proceed until conflicts were resolved. And there he was, hoisted by his own signature. As that meeting wrapped up, Daniel stared at me through his camera with something new in his eyes. Not anger anymore. Recognition. He finally understood that this wasn't some emotional revenge plot. This was consequence unfolding exactly according to rules he'd written himself. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later. Daniel asked to speak with me privately, and for the first time in years, he actually waited for my answer. That alone showed me how much had changed. He looked smaller on screen, without authority to lean on. Not humbled, exactly, just stripped of options. He tried to start with righteous anger, but it faded fast. "You went too far," he said, though there was no real force behind it. I let him talk, calm and measured, watching him spend what little leverage he had left. Daniel insisted this would damage the company, warned about instability and reputation problems that would somehow be my fault. When he finally ran out of steam, I spoke once. "I didn't break anything. I used the rule you wrote." That sentence landed harder than anything he'd shouted all week. Daniel stared at me, searching for some comeback that didn't exist. Deep down, he knew the truth. The systems he'd designed to protect his authority had simply worked as designed, just not for him. The board joined us moments later for what everyone knew would be the final meeting. Scott Anderson, the chairman, spoke with quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need volume to make its point. He outlined next steps, governance continuity, and the need for leadership that could actually withstand scrutiny. Then he looked directly at Daniel through the camera. "We're asking for your resignation." Daniel didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue with. He nodded once, stiff as a board, and just like that, gone. No dramatic exit, no security escort, no headlines. Real power shifts happen quietly, which is exactly how I prefer it. As Daniel's screen went black, Timothy stepped forward on his video feed. All business. He held up a signed document. "Proxy authority reverts to you," he said to me. "Effective immediately. $1 already transferred, exactly as we agreed." I accepted it without any big reaction. The authority had done its job. Holding on to it longer would have been pointless, maybe even dangerous. When the meeting ended and everyone logged off, I sat there for a minute, just breathing. No rush of triumph, no victory dance, just balance. Daniel's downfall wasn't my win. It was the natural conclusion of a sequence he'd started years before I even understood what was happening. The days after Daniel stepped down were quieter than I'd expected. No news coverage, no industry gossip. The audit moved forward with professional efficiency, the way serious consequences usually do when lawyers and accountants get involved. What followed wasn't company collapse, but course correction. Contracts got reviewed, committees restructured, policies reinstated that Daniel had quietly killed for his own convenience. The company adjusted itself the way any healthy system does after you remove a source of constant stress. I started noticing the relief in small ways. My shoulders stopped tensing up every time the phone rang. Emails started asking for clarification instead of demanding I defend every decision I'd made. People spoke to me normally instead of whispering like they were afraid someone might be listening. Then, about 6 weeks later, the board called. Scott Anderson's tone was completely different from every conversation we'd had before. Respectful, measured, like he was talking to an actual human being instead of a problem to solve. He acknowledged my role in everything, my restraint throughout the whole mess, and the clarity I'd brought to what he called an unstable situation. Then he outlined their decision to create a new position: governance oversight and operational continuity, independent from daily politics. "We'd like you to return," he said, "if you're willing." I didn't answer right away. The offer carried real weight, but so did the cost of accepting it. I'd gotten my voice back without reclaiming my old chair, and that distinction mattered more than I'd realized. I told them I needed time to think it over. After sitting on it for a week, I called back with my answer. Yes, but on my terms. No corporate ladder to climb, no office politics to navigate, no chain of command to dance around. My job would be simple: protect process, question power when it needed questioning, and speak truth when it needed speaking. 6 months later, here I am, working differently than I ever have before. Daniel's replacement actually respects the boundaries Daniel never understood existed. The operational systems run smoother because nobody's constantly overriding them for short-term political wins. I kept that $1 check from Timothy framed on my desk. Not as some kind of trophy, but as a reminder. Real authority isn't measured by how much you pay for it, but by how wisely you use it when it actually matters. The whole experience taught me something I wish I'd understood years earlier. You know how they say the best revenge is living well? That's not quite right. The best revenge is letting people defeat themselves with their own rules while you just stand back and watch it happen. Daniel thought power meant controlling people, silencing opposition, rewriting history to make himself look good. What he never understood is that real influence comes from understanding systems, being patient enough to let consequences develop naturally, and knowing when to speak up versus when to shut up and let other people hang themselves. Jennifer and I were talking about it over dinner last week. She asked me if I felt vindicated, if getting my job back had made it all worthwhile. I told her the job offer wasn't the point. The point was proving that dignity doesn't require volume, that justice doesn't need drama, and that sometimes the quietest moves make the loudest impact. Our kids are both in college now, our daughter studying engineering, our son going into business. I've been telling them this story not because I want them to seek revenge when someone wrongs them, but because I want them to understand that patience and precision beat anger and noise every single time. The company's doing better now. Stock's up, employee satisfaction surveys show real improvement, and we haven't had a major operational crisis since the leadership change. Turns out when you stop treating experienced professionals like disposable assets, they tend to stick around and actually solve problems instead of just covering them up. Looking back on the whole thing, I realized Daniel did me a favor by firing me. It forced me to discover leverage I didn't know I had and use it more effectively than I ever would have as a regular employee. Sometimes getting knocked down is exactly what you need to figure out how strong you really are. The most important lesson isn't about corporate politics or legal loopholes. It's simpler than that. Real power doesn't come from shouting louder than everyone else or making threats you can't back up. Real power comes from understanding the rules better than the people who wrote them, having the patience to wait for the right moment, and the discipline to stay calm while everyone else is losing their minds. When you master that combination, you don't need to defeat your enemies. They'll defeat themselves, and all you have to do is make sure you're still standing when the dust settles.